So great things also to our partners in Cameroon, and thank also Oumarou and Charlene for these very great presentations, I believe. So as both of them said, the topic of climate reparations is so important in the face of climate and ongoing injustices. It's so complex though, there are so many facets already, like as the audience has already mentioned, there are so many parts and perspectives from which we can view this conversation. Which is why today we have invited experts to discuss what reparations actually mean in the context of climate justice and global justice especially. What is the importance of a decolonial and especially an intersectional framework? And what is being done in Germany actually to fight for it? So how can we actually move from, as Victorine has said to me earlier, from discomfort to maybe even action? I am very honored today to have with me on stage Victorine Thoener, Oumarou Mfochivé, Lina, Adil, and Fatim, Selina. Please come up here. So, Victorine, you have already shared some very meaningful words with us at the start of the panel. I would very much like for you to introduce yourself again and also share with us how do you think have the colonial atrocities that have been committed by Germany affected the people in Cameroon, and how have they shaped identities and stories that still echo until today?
Thank you so much. Again, I'm Victorine. I'm in a way emotional and excited to talk about this topic. It has been really an emotional journey, and I hope that we can all travel that route together. So again, my name is Victorine. I'm originally from Cameroon, from the northwest region of Cameroon. And for some of you who do not know, still those colonial consequences that are going on right now, there is a conflict in that part of the country. Since it's a minority with regards to the French-speaking part of Cameroon. But that is not what we are talking about today. So I work in the climate and biodiversity interface. I work a lot with indigenous people and local communities in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and in advocacy as well as campaign work with the aim of protecting biodiversity as well as protecting our climate. So today I'm going to talk about Cameroon and Germany, about stories I heard growing up from my parents, from my family, about stories I have heard. And so going back to the very beginning, I just want to say here that there is no way we can repair if we do not acknowledge the root of what is it that has come to the point of us wanting to repair something. So let's go back to 1884, and let's be very clear. The colonization of Cameroon or any other country that was colonized was not diplomatic. This was never an act of diplomacy. It was theft. Lands were seized. Resources were extracted. Bodies were exploited. People were forced to grow crops that were exported to countries where their economies were built and some other person's future was built. They never got to own the land that they worked. Never. Also, I would like to look here about the opportunities lost, about disrupted lives. The scientists who never had the chance. The artist who never got to create. The entrepreneur who lacked electricity. And this is not statistics. It's not. It's people's lives that were interrupted, it's opportunities that were lost, it's people who were never even given the chance to begin. And that said, it was not only disrupted lives, people lost their lives to the forced labor that was impacted on them, to the punishment, to the whips, to the hunger. The scars, they run deep, very deep, because when the Germans left with their flags, it did not end there. The damage had been done. Societies were damaged, cultures were destroyed, systems were weakened, governance was nowhere to be found. People were left to fend for themselves. So when we talk today about climate change and people suffering, it's not because they have a choice. They were made vulnerable. They were made vulnerable. They were not originally vulnerable. They had no opportunity to be able to build the kind of security they need to be resistant to the kinds of storms that they face today. So, while we are here and talking, the thing which comes to mind when we talk about climate reparations, let's be clear, it's a promise which says, we hear you, we see you, and we are not going to walk away from the damage that we caused. It is about turning our collective pain into policy and into collective power. It is about working in solidarity to heal together. It is about building trust. It is about building hope. It is about partnerships which are built on equal power and they are centered on justice. And let us again be clear. Climate reparations is not radical, but when we ignore justice, that is what is radical. And again, when we talk about climate reparations, this is not about being polite, it is about being clear. Let us say the word. Let us mean the word. Let us demand the word. There is no climate justice without reparations. And there is no future built which you can build on equality without going back and acknowledging history. So today, together, let us think about healing. This is not assigning guilt to anybody. It's about saying that we need to recognize the dignity of the people who were never given a chance. It is about thinking together how we can help them repair, help them heal. It is not a burden to ask for reparations. It goes beyond charity. It goes beyond aid. It is an undue justice. It's overdue. And we need to talk about it like it is. Let us tell the stories where they have not yet been told. Let us tell the stories where they have not been told enough. And let us keep telling the stories until they become mainstream. Thank you.
Thank you for your strong words, Victorine, and also thank you for starting at the beginning in that way. You focus quite a lot on the people and what it has done to their stories and their identities. I would like to move on to ask you, Oumarou, how do you think has the Cameroonian environment been affected by the German colonial rule?
Merci pour votre question. J'avoue déjà que Victorine a longuement déjà parlé de cette question et je peux juste dire que les émissions de gaz à effet de serre et la consommation des populations ici en Allemagne ont des conséquences importantes et graves au niveau des pays du Sud global, comme le Cameroun. Et ces impacts peuvent se voir sur le terrain à travers des inondations excessives qui détruisent des habitations, qui aussi détruisent des économies, des populations qui sont déjà très très vulnérables, et aussi qui poussent les populations à se déplacer massivement de leur zone de vie pour chercher des conflits, des abris ailleurs, et qui créent énormément de conflits intercommunautaires au Cameroun. Alors, il faut aussi noter que dans l'histoire coloniale, les habitants du Sud ont été amenés de force en Europe et ils ont été contraints d'utiliser leur force de travail pour faire avancer le développement des pays européens. Et aujourd'hui, les crises mondiales obligent les gens à quitter leur pays d'origine, à l'instar des Camerounais aussi, alors que la politique migratoire européenne les conduit à mourir en mer chaque jour. Et ils se voient aussi de temps en temps expulsés. Et donc, il faut dire que c'est une injustice que nous devons combattre. Donc, et aussi, il faut noter que la prospérité économique de l'Allemagne, que nous connaissons aujourd'hui, ne vient pas, ce n'est pas un miracle économique. Ça vient du fait que vers les années 1953, précisément le 27 février 1953, la moitié de la dette de l'Ouest a été annulée, et cela grâce aux efforts des pays du Sud aussi, et qui sont aujourd'hui très endettés. Et aussi, vous savez, on dit souvent qui détient la monnaie détient le pouvoir. Et pour alléger aussi la dette allemande, ils ont on leur a accepté de payer leur dette avec la monnaie locale, c'est-à-dire le Deutschmark, et ce qui a facilité leur expansion économique. Et aussi, il y a eu la politique d'import-substitution, c'est-à-dire ils ont limité leur importation et ils ont permis à l'économie allemande de prospérer. Et donc, tous ces éléments ont concouru en faveur de l'expansion économique allemande. Et donc, il est important aussi que cet exemple de l'allemand soit répercuté vers le Sud global qui se voit aujourd'hui très endetté et qui, n'est-ce pas, se voit continuer d'exploiter à travers l'exploitation des ressources naturelles, et donc qui paye des dettes, et donc aussi leur monnaie coloniale est endossée à l'euro, qui est un grave problème aussi, parce que pour faire par exemple des achats dans d'autres pays, ils sont obligés de faire une convertibilité de la monnaie du franc CFA en euros pour pouvoir peut-être payer des choses aux États-Unis par exemple.
Thank you so much, Oumarou and Lina and Victorine. both highlighting the need to fight, and Oumarou, you also kind of start delving into climate finances as well. So I would actually be very interested to know, Lina, you are a policy advisor and have been working on what is actually happening on like an international policy level. So how's the actual conversation going if we're talking about finances? Like, can you, and also please introduce yourself.
Hear me?
Not yet.
Not yet. I'm Lina Adil. I work as a policy advisor for adaptation and loss and damage at German Watch. And I think it would be hard to share more from the international negotiation space because it's not very much pretty. And as you mentioned, it's not only about the finance, but even the finance is suffering. So I'd like to start by pinning down some of the legal aspects that kind of frame the reparations conversation in the climate negotiations. So under the international law, a country or actor that has caused harm to others, especially through actions that violate legal or moral obligations, has a responsibility to do three things. First, acknowledge the harm. Second, cease the harmful activity. And third, provide reparations. When we speak about Germany, Germany is the fourth largest historic emitter. And according to this international law, it has to acknowledge the harm done by its greenhouse gas emissions and the current emissions, stop emitting and phase out fossil fuels, and provide reparations. In general, the calls for reparations in the international climate policy regime has often been formed as a backward-looking exercise. But like as Victorine also mentioned, that vulnerability is not an inherent thing. It's produced, it's in a way manufactured. So in this sense, reparations are also forward-looking. They should ideally address the long-standing structural inequities and asymmetries that today we have like more exposure to climate change and lower capacities to adapt or respond based on these historic and colonial legacies. But these are today's problems. In 3 years ago, countries decided that they would create a new fund called the Loss and Damage Fund, and it was during COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. And this was only a decision to create it, but the fight for it has been ongoing for 30 years before, especially from small island states, and then more and more developing countries joined because they have started seeing the impacts of climate change manifested as losses and damages. So 30 years after, in 2022, this Loss and Damage Fund has been created, and it represented a huge, significant diplomatic breakthrough. It was all over the media, everyone was happy that now there is a fund. But one major flaw of this fund is that it excluded liability. And this was the only basis to reach consensus. Rich countries, developed countries have been very much opposed to any language that mentioned liability and hints reparations and other modes of justice. To be more clear also about Germany's role, it hasn't been very bad. They have actually been quite instrumental and constructive in the conversations that led eventually to the political consensus. And also, they were one of the first countries to pledge finance to this fund. And they pledged around 92 million euros in the year after in Dubai. But still, without legal accountability, this fund, which exists today, cannot deliver full justice. It cannot guarantee restitution, non-repetition, or full recognition of harm. Last year, the negotiations were mostly about a new collective goal for finance, where countries decide on how much climate finance is to be delivered to developing countries. And we did a quick report, it's called the Fair Shares Report, to understand how much is the fair share of each country. And we found that Annex 2 countries, which are developed countries according to 1992 categorization, are responsible for 88% for loss and damage finance under equitable burden sharing scenarios. The United States stands at the highest of the list. They're responsible for 45% of the losses and damages. And Germany comes in the third place, responsible for 5.8% of the fair shares. Now looking also at today's new government, good news and bad news. So Germany, in its recent coalition building document, they made a commitment to deliver their fair share of climate finance, but there are several contradictions in the approach that they presented, where Germany plans to rely more on private capital and non-traditional donors. And like there is a nice term that is usually used, innovative sources of finances. But when you ask what's the innovation in it, it's usually private capital, which is companies and it leads also to less accountability because no company is a signatory to the Paris Agreement or Another contradiction is that Germany mostly relies heavily on development cooperation budget to provide climate finance, but it also mentions that it wants to shrink down the budget for ODA from 0.82% to 0.7%. And even though in percentages this looks very little, but it has a huge impact on how much climate finance in general is to be provided. I think also under the current geopolitical tensions, the mistrust between the global south and the global north is even growing wider. And finance plays a big role in building or tapping together this trust. And climate finance promises have been broken over and over again over the years. And also it's not only the quantity that is provided, but also the quality of how finance is provided, where it's usually provided as loans, which increases the debt of countries, either also very much conditional, deciding on how, where, and in which sector, and who are the people who will use the money, which even leads to further mistrust. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Lina. That is so interesting. It also still seems like on an international policy level, there are some things happening, but definitely still not enough, and there's still a lot of resistance. What usually these kind of politics needs is pressure from the streets in a way, and we need movements, we need alliances all over the world, but also here in Germany. So I was also wondering, Fatim, you've been part of several Black BFUC collectives for a lot of years by now. How's the conversation about climate reparations going on a movement level? What's the? Can you tell us some insights?
Okay, thank you so much. I tried to write down my reflections on these questions before the panel, and it's still very raw because there's just a lot of emotions at the moment, I think. And I also want to highlight that my way into political action, particularly into climate action, was from anti-racist movements and anti-racist organizing, specifically Black organizing in the southern part of Germany. And this really impacts how I do climate action now and how I organize, but it also impacts how I understand and live through the German climate movement, which is to be honest, very white and full of violence for a person who's not white. And I'm lucky enough to have comrades with me that also acknowledge that, and we are since years organizing against this, but it's exhausting. And I also think there's a real misconception sometimes on, there's just a gap between understanding climate reparations, linking it to that it also means to save the lives of Black and brown people everywhere, and adopting this into real practice in daily life, but also in the climate movement, because there's still this understanding that racism and action for the environment and climate do not go together. It's very prominent. And I think in the next few minutes I just want to share my reflection, and I guess also like a lot of the speakers who have spoken before me, there's a lot of things I touch on which do feel very heavy and which might also, I don't know, re-evoke some memories people carry with them in terms of having met and experienced the violence of the German state and state institutions, etc. And I was also reflecting a bit, particularly thinking about reparations in terms of time and colonialism, especially what Oumarou also mentioned in the publication, that it's not like there's a linear timeline or something in terms of reparation and in terms of what is happening regarding the climate and the environment and the destruction and everything that follows. And I think talking about climate reparation should also teach us that the whole thing of trying to have a step-to-step guide of how to solve the climate crisis, and at the end we are in some kind of solution or breaking point when the reparations are paid is not true, because it actually, as violence, also resistance moves, I feel in circles. And okay, so I'm just gonna start and read. So today I'm coming to you with a lot of emotions. To be precise, with a lot of anger and with a lot of grief. A few days ago, over the Easter holidays, a Black youth was murdered by the police, again, here in Germany, in Oldenburg. There were 4 shots in the back. And I'm generally asking myself, sitting on this panel, how can we demand climate reparations from a state that has been legitimizing the killing of Black and brown bodies for centuries? I mean, of course, those of us who are active in any kind of political, social movement, especially focusing on climate justice, should know or have long known that nation states and capitalist economic development cannot be separated from taking life on this earth. They always come with that. And during colonialism, Black and brown bodies have become matter, like nature, that is owed to be exploited, chewed on, and spit out as waste by colonial empires. This new publication from Conceptwerk highlights this as well in the context of Cameroon and the German colonial past and present. With the decree of the 15th of June in 1896, the land became terra nullius. So the so-called terres vacantes et sans maître of so-called now Cameroon were transferred to German state ownership. The colonial administration of Germany grabbed everything they could profit and benefit from securing forest concessions, increasing deforestation, overriding the indigenous knowledge system of agriculture for cash crops, and so on and so on. So I said I come with a lot of emotions today, and one emotion I also carry with me is hope, because injustices have always been met with resistance. Several demonstrations and vigils are being organized for Lorenzo, the Black youth who got killed in Oldenburg, and indigenous uprisings against the climate crisis caused by colonial states, companies, capitalists, and patriarchs are ever present. With this in mind, no doubt that the climate crisis and the violence we suffer under and witness as black and brown bodies in the system of white supremacy are connected. Either we experience this on the continent, but also beyond its borders that have been drawn by Europeans. I think the publication makes a clear case for how climate reparations are essential in moving towards decolonial climate action. You see, decolonial climate action doesn't mean tweaking the system. It means burning it down and building something rooted in care. It means seeing that the climate crisis is not just about carbon, it's about control and subjugation. It's about who breathes clean air and who breathes the smoke. It's about who dreams on the bones of anti-colonial ancestors and survivors and who is forced to survive today. And decolonization is not a metaphor. It's a method, it's a self-drawn map, not imposed. It's a muscle memory turned into movement. It means naming the colonial violence that is still defining our world, the separation of human and nature, the turning of forests into commodities, the myth that land can be owned or can belong to anyone but herself. Climate reparations enable us to name and detect the coloniality of the climate crisis. It urges us to act, and it emphasizes the need for a systemic transformation. However, while climate reparations rightfully put the nation-state in a position of responsibility and reparation, it should remain clear that reparations are not the final step. They're the first ones to take. A crack in the foundation of an unjust world, a gesture, and a symbol that says, we see you, we remember, and we are ready to change. So let's be clear. If climate justice doesn't speak of empires that have torn down the world how we used to know it, the indigenous systems that our ancestors has been living off, it's not justice. If green future, in terms of, let's say, new energy systems like green hydrogen still runs on stolen time and stolen labor, it's not a future. And there is no future without reparations. Thank you.
Thank you, Fatim. I think you're completely right. It is an emotional conversation, so it's just like, I need to take a breather after this, after all you said. Thank you so much. And thinking of the question that you posed, Fatim, of how can we demand things from a state when the state itself is brutal in the way? So a question for all of you, what is there beyond loss and damages, and especially what kind of alliances do we need to build in this room, on a policy level, wherever, to push for climate reparations on a national level or also globally?
Starting this reflection, I would say that pressure, so telling stories is one thing, but putting pressure on those who need to make decisions is another thing. So we need to understand that to be able to make climate reparations mainstream, we need to confront power structures with the truth. It is important that any movement that works on this, it has to be loud. It has to be rooted in solidarity. It has to be consistent. It has to be resilient. And it is not a one-way street. Like I said, the key word is solidarity, which means we need to connect the dots. Let's connect German emissions to the floods in Cameroon, to that school child who can no longer go to school because their school has been flooded. The same child who has lost their home to landslides, to floods. The same child who cannot eat because their mother cannot harvest crops because of drought. Let's connect the dots. And again, let us tell the story of history. Link the colonial plunder to the poverty and the vulnerability that does exist now in those countries. And let us, therefore, build advocacy campaigns with voices from Cameroon to stand together. Let us put a face to the climate crisis. Climate crisis is not abstract. There are faces behind it, be it the farmers, be it the mothers, be it the children, the lives that are lost. Let us give them a face, and let us give them a voice, and let us bring all of this into German classrooms, into newsrooms, into the parliament, into churches. Let us make it impossible to forget, impossible not to talk about, impossible not to hear about. That is where the pressure point is. There are so many things in this life that only came to be because it was forced into life. It didn't just happen, it was forced into life. And so, if we are serious about what is it we really want out of this, then we need to be consistent, we need to be resilient, and we need to be proud of what we are doing, because we are doing a good thing.
I'm also hoping that this research conducted has kind of effect of being repeated in different settings where Germany has been or is present, like colonies of Germany. For example, also thinking of Burundi and Rwanda, but also Namibia, and using the demand of climate reparations, also as mentioned before, as a tool of connection and building movement together. I also see like very critical of these international climate negotiation spaces, because it feels like you're moving like 1 inch and then they go like back 5. But they are a great space to meet common like climate justice activists and to connect and to learn. And I think we know that the climate crisis is a result of like systems that are trying to kill everything that is resisting towards like patriarchy, capitalism, and whiteness. And yeah, I do think that like these spaces can be very good to somehow connect and learn also different strategies of how to organize and building something outside of these systems, because of course we need to learn and we need to relearn. We need to also reprogram our mind in terms of like the colonial mindset that has been taught to us what nature is supposed to serve to, and how we take care of it. Yeah, and I think this, like what you mentioned in terms of like it should be impossible to ignore, because it's so present in people's lives, but it's also like this huge silence that you were talking about before, like the silence like filled with grief, very heavy. And I think also because a lot of people, especially I feel like at least in Germany, they feel like, or black people in Germany feel like that the climate crisis has not so much to do with them, but it has everything to do with them, because they are the ones that will suffer the most, or already suffering the most. And this can also be a way of like starting a conversation of like, hey, these like reparations we are demanding, they are there to like give you a better life and to also give your children a better life, and also to demand the justice that your ancestors never got.
Thank you, Fatim. For a quick organizational note, we are a bit late on time. So unfortunately, Victorine has to go. which is quite sad because we really wanted to open up a space for you guys to also ask a question. So please give her a big round of applause. Thank you. But moving on, I would actually like to open the stage to you guys. What kind of questions would you like to ask the panel members?
Yeah, thank you so much, all of you, for your great contributions. And Lina, when you were mentioning there were so many promises made at these climate conferences, also by Germany, and then they make these promises and then they break them again. And I'm thinking probably because if in the society there's not so much support for this or interest, then it's easier for them to just, you know, not follow up and not hold up their end of the bargain or something. So I'm thinking probably the most important thing is really to mobilize the people. Now we are in a small circle of people, I think mostly people who are maybe also working in the climate field, or, you know, like they have some kind of interest. This is not the majority of people that we want to reach. And I have a question of, like, what do you think is necessary to really make it, as Victorine was saying, to get this topic into the mainstream? Like, what do you think is what we can do to get it into the mainstream?
Thank you so much. I think, as you said, like, just comparing this year's elections to the last elections, the term climate change completely disappeared, and that tells you a lot, like, from majority of the parties. And I think that also speaks to, like, what is the public speaking about close to elections time. And this is only one, like, step in the entire mobilizing space. But I think you're completely right. Like, this is where it starts from. What do the public care about? And I honestly think, like, now we are in times of multiple crises, and I fully acknowledge that climate change is not the only problem that we're facing. And also in terms of, like, this, I don't know, duality of let's prioritize what's more important, what are people speaking about, without recognizing that, like, each crisis chooses its people, but at the end they're all people who are suffering from the same sources of many of the problems we're facing today. So I think, like, just breaking free out of this hostility of there is one challenge or, like, 3 top political priorities we need to be speaking about, to, yeah, broadening, like, the perspective of the politicians, but also for the public to be able to, I don't know, digest multiple crises that are just a result of the system that we live in.
Any other questions from the audience?
Good evening, everyone, again.
Thank you.
I just want to contribute as well. Something I've been thinking about for a while, because I'm also in this field of activism, and I also heard about a brother who got killed in Oldenburg, and it also makes me think of Brother Douala Mangabel, that was in 1914. He got killed by the German because he was one of those who said, no, I mean, the short history, quick and short history is that the German at that point wanted to create a Hafen, wie sagt man Hafen auf English? A port, harbor. Yeah, exactly, in Cameroon, and to do that, they had to exploit and send all the people, the indigenous people, the Douala people, out from the coast, and so he was against that. And what happened is that he got hanged and he got killed by the German government at at that time. And connecting to what's happening today with all the police brutality, for me, I understand it's just a systemic, it's thing that these things has been planned, has been written down, has been taught. There's a way of seeing us. So when we talk about reparation, personally, when I listen to all this story, I'm like, man, I'm tired of shouting for you to give me justice. Because I ask you, who are you? Who are you to give me the justice I'm asking for? Because just recently, 1 month ago, last year, William Shield was killed, was stabbed by a Turkish guy, and then we fought against, we were on the street for a demonstration, and then at the court, what was said is that he was really brutal and aggressive, and that's why he got stabbed by the Turkish guy, and the Turkish guy got 6 years. And the justice again. And the same thing in 1914. So you see how it works. Brothers and sisters here in Germany fought like 10 years to have the guy who was killed, Douala Mangabel in this case, was killed in Cameroon like 1914, to have his name on the street here in Germany. 10 years for Germany to recognize it. So I'm like, do I have to wait so long when people are still dying right now? When people are still suffering right now? When it's still going on and on? I'm like, no, this is my decision. And I wonder if each one can take a decision on his own and say, I'm going to do something. I'm not going to wait necessarily for my government, because we all paid our taxes here in Germany, right? But do I have to wait for that money for the EU to decide to make some kind of policies to fight with Qatar and whatsoever, to decide who's going to get the money at the end of the day, for that to happen, for save some few lives like in Congo or in Cameroon or whatever in Palestine? No, I'm sorry. I think everyone should take his own responsibility. It goes in little stuffs, what we do every day, but just solidarity. I think that's the key. Just do something. Whatever, just do something. That's just what I want to put on talk about the reparation. That's for me the fastest way to get in there to save life.
I think it's a very valid question to ask. Like, who are you to give me justice? I also don't think I would ever wait for justice to come in that matter. And I don't know, also, I talked about time, and also in that sense, my activism is also informed by what has come before, or we're still like living or like ongoing, also the struggles that were taken from like centuries under very present colonial occupation to now. And I do think that it's important to know that it's a long road. You also talked about how the Loss and Damage Fund has been like a demand for over 30 years, and now it's there, but it's still actually not really running, or like not really functioning in that way. And I think it's important also when we think about climate reparations. Of course, the goal is that we get the reparations, but we should also focus on the path, because it's also about how many people can we organize for that? How many movements can we bring together? How many people can we help to recognize that like these reparations is for them, and that like a fight for like the climate and the environment is a fight for life, also their life and everything they know and care about. And I think this is like very important to always remember, because of course the system will try to like give you everything to stop you, like every obstacle to like put you down and that you not get up. And it's about finding these like connections and like building them up, and again creating a system that can also still run afterwards, because even if like reparations are achieved, there will be more to like fight for, and it's exhausting. But in the same way, I feel it's also very beautiful to recognize that the kind of like anger and grief and need for justice you feel is also in so many other like beings. I mean also in animals, if you think about like animals uprising and they like the whales like conquering the ships and everything, like they're also on our side, you know? Like we have a lot of like fighters and nature defenders and stuff. So yeah, I think that was just something I wanted to add to your thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'd like to add something a bit different, but like I think it came up a lot in the presentation and also from Fatim on the role of food and agriculture and land and water and how all of these things are connected. I think the reparations conversation is mostly evident maybe in the climate space or in the development space, but I think it's also relevant for so many other sectors. Like one striking example is the recent strategy from Germany for Africa's agriculture and food, where it has improved. Like they do this strategy for Africa every 4 years, and the last strategy was mostly technical fixes, technology. Let's take technology to Africa. Da da da. Now they published a new strategy earlier this year, and it's much improved. But when you look at the details, there is an insistence on food security rather than food sovereignty. And food security means you just have your nutrition, calorie nutrition, no matter where it comes from. It could come from candy, or it could come from maize, or it could come from whatever. So like this ask for sovereignty in so many aspects: climate sovereignty, development sovereignty, food sovereignty is important. And I think like the other aspect that is kind of the umbrella that governs all of this is the financial architecture around us and the trade rules and the systems that maintain debt to countries and locks them in debt cycles for years and years and centuries. And also like I acknowledge there are many developing countries with corrupt governments, but even though with that, they have very small physical space to be able to invest in their own resilience, in their country's resilience, and that's largely because of the debt crisis that they're facing, and this is quite evident in Africa. I'd like to end, just because there are some of my Sudanese friends here, I'd like to end by saying a Sudanese phrase that honestly captures this for me, and it translates to, where do I cash your sorry? In Arabic, it's and I think like it's like has been mentioned for quite some time, but like it's a cycle of many things. It's about acknowledging harm, apologizing for the harm, doing something about the harm, and then in a way not repeating the harm. And I think this non-repeating could be replicated for different systems, whether it's climate or development or whatever. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Lina. Since we're running a bit over time, there's one last question that I'd like to hear from you, especially regarding like the fight against debt, for example. Like there's Debt for Climate, for example. There are initiatives that actually really focus on this topic. I was thinking, what like movements, like what gives you hope in terms of climate reparations? What concrete what has happened in the past where you're like, actually there's a little bit of a silver lining, even though, and I think you're completely right, it's hard to keep fighting, and I think it's still relevant to focus on, or sometimes think about like who is actually active right now, who instills hope in you.
I think as Fatim said, like the negotiation space is quite frustrating because things move very, very slow. But I think it's mostly from like one example that was very reassuring for me is that in the last year's negotiations in Baku, parties were very much frustrated, developing countries' parties. They came and demanded 1.3 billion, and they ended up with 300 million. And then when speaking to people, they just said this is the only space where we are actually heard and treated as an equal voice, even if it's an imaginary equal voice. But there is this space, and eventually there was an agreement by hook or crook. So reaching these tiny milestones that can be built upon, and also the windows of opportunities that you find in texts or policy text hiding, kind of give me some sorts of hope. And I know it's not the usual thing. It's not seeing communities prosperous and everything. I would love that. But in the space I work in, I think it's mostly the details or the windows of opportunities that are here and there.
Okay, I'm gonna keep it short. I think especially people who have been in Germany the past 2 years know of the hostile politics of this space, and also in terms of how the climate movement might have been changed the last 2 years. And every climate movement that connects climate action to liberation struggles that are going on worldwide gives me hope. And especially in the context of Germany, the ones who fight for the liberation of Palestine.
Je pense que il est important de mentionner qu'il faut investir dans les infrastructures de base universelles qui offrent à tous un accès à une éducation de qualité et abordable, et aussi à l'électricité, aux soins de santé, et à la nature et à la gouvernance démocratique aussi. Et aussi, il faut œuvrer à mettre fin à la pauvreté énergétique de l'Afrique grâce à des partenariats équitables qui favorisent l'acquisition de technologies en Afrique. Et aussi, il est clair que la dette climatique est un concept spécifique. Et donc, il s'agit de rendre visible ces liens invisibles, mais bien réels, afin de créer un ordre mondial plus juste. Donc, de mon point de vue, il est important de créer un networking entre les mouvements du Sud global et du Nord global, en tenant compte des spécificités du Sud aussi et du Nord global, et essayer de rendre les réclamations pour la justice climatique plus fortes.
Thank you so much for your words. Thanks everyone for participating as well. I think to me personally it's been very emotional, also very inspiring evening. And I hope that you can take some time to talk to your friends about it, push for the topic of climate reparations, and take home some thoughts with you. I believe that now Cameroonian food is waiting for us. Not yet, but hopefully soon. But we are closing the panel discussions now. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you guys. Big round of applause for everybody.
Juste pour ajouter, c'est vrai que parlant de la nourriture du Cameroun, c'est vrai que la distance entre le Cameroun et l'Allemagne est très longue, mais on vient de me signaler que nous aurons des délicieux plats camerounais d'ici quelques minutes.